Thank you, good evening, and welcome to the 92nd Street Y and the Forum on Law, Culture, and Society's fabulously successful program, Trials and Error. Tonight, the case of Jordan Belfort. We have a full house tonight. We have a national audience screening from all over the country. I should tell you that President Obama called me this morning and asked that we finish completely at 9 o'clock to give him an opportunity to get more of an audience. And I told him, not a chance, every man for himself. You know, you take on ISIS, I take on Wall Street. And frankly, it's a lot easier to do what I'm about to do because Jordan caved very quickly, and ISIS won't. And we're going to talk about how quickly the government was able to actually enter into a plea deal with Jordan. It's an interesting time to be talking about Wall Street. It was just the other day that Martoma was sentenced from SAC Capital. Some of you read, I know we have a lot of financial Wall Street math geeks in the room today, so you've probably been reading the financial papers, but Martoma was sentenced the other day to 9 years. Steinberg, also from SAC Capital, was sentenced a short while ago for 3.5 years. The Galleon Group, there'll be a sentencing of Gupta next month, I believe. That'll probably be covered on CNBC. And of course, Rajaratnam himself was sentenced to 11 years. And so we're seeing people go to jail. At the same time, there are people complaining that there's not enough people going to jail. The Occupy Wall Street movement, for one, wonders how is it possible that those people responsible for the subprime mortgage collapse, for the bank bailouts, for a new term of art, too big to fail, to become a household term, and that there's just not enough people paying the cost, the price of crime, for manipulating the markets. We even have a federal judge, Jeb Rakoff, who's made the same complaint to the SEC, saying that how come there aren't the people responsible for the bank bailouts are the ones who ended up taking bonuses out of taxpayer dollars, and they never spent any time as well, and the people paying the price are taxpayers and shareholders. And we have Jordan Belfort. He spent 2.2 years and 4 months in prison. He paid $11 million of personal restitution for a fine of $11 and $10 million. He was responsible, part of a stock fraud, market manipulation, and money laundering of over $200 million. He's only paid back $11 million. During his supervised release, there was another payment of $21,000. And there's a lot to talk about today, and about how it was that he entered into the plea and the mechanics of prosecuting people who are Wall Street cheaps. So let me start with you, Jordan. This is the beginning of what is now being known as a tour for you. Time Magazine reported this as a redemption tour. Do you regard this as a redemption tour? Are you attempting, in talking to this audience and other audiences around America, to redeem yourself in some way?
Listen, it's kind of a strange situation for me to be here. I go around the world and I'm a speaker, and I teach people entrepreneurship and sales and that sort of stuff. That's what I do for a living. And so on one side, I know I was going to subject myself to a lot of, I guess, borderline abuse here. So, to start very quickly, it's very negative.
Well, you weren't called a fox.
Right, well, no, but and honestly, so I have to say that, to sit here and listen to this when I'm not getting paid is pretty tough, but I'm here to sort of, because I've been known to walk off before. So anyway, but, I'm not.
Let's get back to redemption.
I'm not speaking, the tour is a redemption tour because I'm turning over all the profits to people who lost money. So that's why they called it a redemption tour. And in terms of my own redemption, in my heart, I've redeemed myself. I live my life a certain way, which I'm proud of. And I do the right thing every day. I give massive value in my business. I've paid a lot more than you said. Your numbers are wildly inaccurate.
Good, let's talk about it.
And, well, honestly, I didn't come here to talk about my fine. I came here to answer questions that were really relevant to the crime, okay? It's a waste of time, I think, okay? So, frankly, I'd rather talk about more productive things, but your numbers are grossly inaccurate. And
no, let's talk about those numbers. I mean, no, because
there you go.
No, it's important to talk about the numbers. If you've paid if you've actually paid more, we would like to know, and your victims would like to know.
Right. Well, you know, I paid, I think, about almost $3 million since in supervised release.
Okay, so
today.
when I said
It's a
21,
you're up
so when I said 21,000, I was wildly off
Yes.
there. Okay, all
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And that payment was made during the supervised release.
Some during and some after.
And I also read somewhere that you had offered or attempted to say every dime of the proceeds for both the film rights and of royalties, you offered 100% of that to be delivered, directed.
I offered 100%, and the U.S. Attorney, the Civil Division, counted me at 50%. They asked me for half of what I offered. And I was like, I thought it was a trick, response or something. And I wanted to pay back this fine from the day I got out of jail. And thankfully, I'm finally in a position now where I'm making a lot of money. I'm able to do a tour like this in the U.S. in 50 cities where I could turn over all the profits. But I guess my frustration is that I tried to settle this thing from the day I really started making money, and I was thwarted the entire time by the Civil Division, who offered me, I offered 100%, they counted me at half. Then they, said I was in default and withdrew and filed a motion with the judge. They withdrew it a few days later, and the judge recently ruled that their case was completely invalid. I didn't owe what they said I owed in terms of half of my income. So, it's a subject of frustration because there's not a lot you can do when you're in my position other than I continue to do the right thing. I pay back a lot of money. All the proceeds of the book, nothing's going to me. Movie is
so
gone.
your intention, just so we'll be clear, your intention is to continue making restitution payments.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me read from the book. This is from the second book, Catching the Wolf of Wall Street. This is an actual, this is from the book. It's during the sentencing of Jordan. And I'm going to read something from the book, and then it's also going to relate to Dan. We do know, I think, during Joel's introduction, a lot of things were said about our panelists, but the most important thing is to know is that Dan prosecuted the case and also was involved in handling Jordan as a cooperating witness, and Kelly is the co-anchor of her own television show from 3 to 5 p.m. every day on CNBC called Closing Bell, exactly, Closing Bell, from 3 to 5 every day. And before that, she was both a correspondent and a columnist with the Wall Street Journal. This is where you're given an opportunity to speak, and you say, Your Honor, I'd like to apologize. And then you have an inner monologue in which you say, don't do it, you ninny, don't apologize to the world, it sounds disingenuous. And then you say, all of the people who lost money, and I was off and running, apologizing to everyone, knowing that despite the fact that I was truly sorry, my words rung so hollow that I was all but wasting my breath. And then you go on to say, I wish I could just say something else, to be more free to say something like this. And this is what you would have wanted to say. You know what, Judge? I fucked up something awful here, and I wish I could say it was just because of drugs, but the truth is that it wasn't. I wasn't just a greedy little bastard, and not just greedy for money, but also for sex and for power and for the admiration of my peers and for just about anything else you can imagine. And what makes it even worse, Your Honor, is that I was blessed with some wonderful gifts, and instead of using them in an honest, productive way, I used them to corrupt other people to get them to do my evil bidding. Now that's really, I thought, really well written and well spoken and soundingly very sincere. And I wonder, now that you've served your time, it's now 15 years since that sentencing hearing, do you feel, and is it roughly that, 1999?
No, it's 2004.
2004,
So
that's right,
10 years,
right,
10 years.
not from the arrest. It's 10 years. Do you feel differently now? Do you feel the same? Do those words still feel fresh in your mind and in your heart?
I think I guess what I was trying to say is that every person before me who stood up before a judge probably apologizes to the world. So it's almost like the judge is, what kind of impact is it going to have? So, and also I'm trying to make it clever so people will read my book, right? So, you're trying to write so people will enjoy it. But it was an insight into really the idea that, in truth, I really felt that we're all blessed with certain gifts. We're all blessed with shortcomings. I had some really extreme gifts in my ability to motivate, to train people, to lead people, and that's with great power comes great responsibility. And rather than assuming that responsibility and doing good things, I corrupted people because I directed this ability to get people to sell stuff and didn't really focus on them selling things they should be selling to people who needed them. That was the mistake.
Have you ever, since you were released, called up a victim and apologized? Have you had any contact with any of the victims since?
I've had some contact by phone, and once in an airport, but he turned out not to really be a victim. It was a setup by a overzealous news network. It was just, but
So when it happens, people reach out to you, or have you just,
honestly,
have you cold called people?
I don't think that's the truth. I don't think it's appropriate to invade someone else's life like that. But if someone called me up and wanted to speak to me, I would speak to them if they called me up, in a reasonable fashion, not in a setup on a TV show or something like that, but in a private, I'd gladly speak to anybody.
Don't worry, I'm not bringing anyone out.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
It's okay.
So further on in the book, you say, this is Dan, this is you at the same hearing. You said, Your Honor, you've just heard the defendant talk briefly about how sorry he is and about how he thinks about honesty and ethics and how he tries to do the right thing every day. And if I were sitting where you're sitting, I would have to be somewhat skeptical of a defendant who has done what this defendant has done. However, I spent many hours discussing honesty and ethics with this man. It's possible that I am Pollyanna, but I think that he truly gets it. I believe that he really, really has tried to move on from some point in the last few years, has tried to change his life. It's what you said. Is it something that, looking back now, you feel as well, or you feel more strongly? Do you have no knowledge?
I have no basis to contradict it. I mean, I take at face value that Mr. Belfort has gone straight, is a good father, a good husband, and has tried to turn his life around. From what I see, that seems to be true. I was basing my comments on the cooperation that he gave to the United States during the several years that he cooperated. And, he had to, by the way, I should put it in context, right? That statement was made among many statements talking about his crimes, right? So there was a long letter written to the judge, which is written in sentencings of cooperators, which laid out everything he ever did wrong. And so the judge, the judge had also sat through several trials, so he was well familiar with Mr. Belfort.
But he served as a cooperating witness.
That's right.
And part of the reason for doing so is that he assumed that you and the other prosecutors, including the prosecutor that Joel was talking about, would do exactly what you did, which was you would support this plea deal and that you would be in favor of a leniency on his sentence. I mean, this is what prosecutors do.
Well, prosecutors do that in the appropriate circumstances. I mean, that's, using cooperators is probably as old as crime itself, and there are a lot of crimes that I could rattle off that would never have been solved if it hadn't been for the use of cooperators. That said, you certainly don't want to use just anyone as a cooperator, and when you use them, you have to make sure that they're not, that they are telling the truth about what they did. And it's not like on TV where they just sort of get up there on the stand and they say, well, that guy committed a terrible crime. And then the defense lawyer gets up and says, prosecutor gave you immunity for this, didn't they? And the prosecutors, bow their head and they can't believe that the jig is up. That's not how it works, right? I mean, you as a prosecutor, you have to accept truth above all, and it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And there is no witness in my entire career that embodies that more than Jordan Belfort. The direct examination of Mr. Belfort at the first trial of Stratton Oakmont's outside auditor took 3 days. The direct examination, that's before Mr. Fischetti got up to cross. So we went over everything that he had done. The stock fraud was just part of it. All the stuff you saw in the movie that might make a reasonable juror question the credibility of a witness. We went over all that for hours on the witness stand. So that's what a cooperator is all about. And if you're not willing to accept that as the government, then you shouldn't make the cooperation agreement in the first place.
Let's talk about the movie for a moment. Kelly, maybe I'm going to get you involved in this. People criticized the film for 3 reasons. One, they said that it glamorized the debauchery of Stratton Oakmont. That includes the sex, the quaaludes, the yachts, the helicopters, the mansions, and of course the hookers. But more importantly, there were the film. This is the look of nostalgia. This is the look.
Mostly for Quaaludes.
Yeah, this is a wistful look, ladies and gentlemen. The look of glory days. There's also the idea that it's a victimless crime.
I'm sober for 18 years, by the way, just so you know.
Okay. Well, then you can imagine why you were thinking
Exactly.
back. You know, that unlike the film Boiler Room, which I understand also may have been based on Stratton Oakmark, this film actually had no victims, and it just had, it was purely from the point of view of Jordan and his friends. And then, of course, there was the criticism that there was, in fact, a sympathetic portrait of Jordan. And one question, or several questions maybe we can all talk about, but for you, Kelly, I mean, do you think that you cover this is your beat, that Wall Street believes that it has an image problem, that it's self-conscious about it, that it perceives itself as a breeding ground for financial chicanery, and that when you see a film like this, there's an I can't believe that this is what people will think? Because, you know, it's very interesting. Martin Scorsese, who, by the way, was invited, was planning on coming, but had to be somewhere else. I wanted him to see sort of the Wolf of Wall Street unplugged, so to speak. But, you know, many people said about the Scorsese film, they said, this is Goodfellas. This is Casino. This is the same movie. It's got the same feel, the same style. Why is it that people don't seem to be that upset about mafioso whacking people and having them sleep with the fishes, than they do people cheating and using other people's trust as a way to enrich themselves and to live a life of just debauchery?
I think they do have a problem with it. I think I asked our reformed broker, Josh Brown, this afternoon, who's written a book, who lived through some of the activities that Jordan embodies in the 90s and is since reformed, as he would call it. He's in a different part of the business now, as are most people. It just doesn't exist today the way that it used to. This kind of behavior in this country seems to follow the money, and the money's not there the way that it used to be. You could look at maybe some of the high-frequency trading firms, some of the technology, the wealthy sort of tech Silicon Valley parts of the country, perhaps for that new iteration, but you know, there's a certain, I think nostalgia, unfortunately, is the word. You know, there's a twinkle in the eye around the floor of the New York Stock Exchange with the Wolf of Wall Street when the guys say, yeah, you know, those were the days. So today it's different. And I'm not sure whether it's a problem that is specific to Wall Street, frankly. I think, unfortunately, that what we see in the movies gives us a sense of what it looks like when money's thrown around and the human life has been devalued.
Well, you know, we know this from The Sopranos, that gangsters love, say, Scarface. Do we know whether Wall Street, I know that I read somewhere that Jordan loves Gordon Gekko.
Well, so does everybody who's on Wall Street, and I think that's absolutely part of the problem.
That there is, you're saying even today, though it may not exist, it is still glamorized for people who come on the street.
Of course. The same way that, you know, being a gangster was glamorized by those kinds of movies. I mean, what's everyone doing in the audience here today?
Well, Joel thinks they're here to see you.
You're drawn by the glamour of it. We're all laughing at these jokes about the way people were treated and the stuff, and oh, it's a good shtick, and this and the that, and the foxy lady. I mean, it's sick.
So, well, wait a minute. You're applauding, that's why you're here. She just said that. Be very careful what you applaud on stage. But the idea that you're saying that even people on Wall Street, although they recognize that those days are gone, you're saying that people who come on the street still see this. That's why I said before, asked you, is there an image problem that people are actually embarrassed by it, or do they embrace it in some way, even though they know it doesn't exist, that those days are gone?
I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't think this is a Wall Street specific story, and unfortunately, the same way that there's probably two groups today. There's the group who saw Wall Street and just wanted that life, or the Wolf of Wall Street and wants that life. And then there's the group of guys who are kind of doing a boring job sitting in front of a computer all day, maybe don't feel like they're doing God's work, but also don't feel like they're the worst guy in the world. And the movie doesn't resonate with them at all. And I think that's probably true of a lot of different things, that it's not necessarily a Wall Street problem so much as it is a problem of people in a culture where money is what they're after and what it's all about. And for a period of time, the epicenter of that was certainly Wall Street.
Any reason why you, though, think, aside from that we don't see the same reaction against gangster films as we do in this case? Is there something about this particular film?
Well, because we have Chase on the corner, and we all have a credit card, we have a bank account, so it feels like we're more involved.
More
Whereas
people.
I don't think the average person feels like they're directly affected by what's happening with the mafia, unless they are. I think when it comes to the financial world, because it's so poorly understood, because it's complex, and because there are parts of every firm, like every part of the world where there's nefarious activity, you hear about it and you just think, yeah, I don't know, and it seems to affect me, and I need to know what's going on. And you see a movie like this and you feel like, wow, that's the picture of what's going on. It's a picture of part of it. It's not necessarily the whole truth, but you certainly feel more affected than when it's just the Italian-American culture or something like that.
Hey, Dan, we know that your prosecuting partner, co-counsel, didn't like the movie. Did you? I mean, is there something about the film that you think, are you as equally opposed to the depiction here, whether it's an accurate portrayal or not, just the idea that this crime was being presented to the world as, almost playful? And something not to be taken seriously because they don't even have victims in the movie?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I like the movie as storytelling. I'll tell you about one scene that I like particularly well. But you talk to different people and they see it different ways. I mean, some people don't see it as glorifying the culture. They see it as a drug addict who was doing stuff that was disgusting, and other people see it as he was having fun and he was with prostitutes.
But that was the official position that Scorsese and DiCaprio said when they were having. Well, they said when people were criticizing the film as they were having the run up to the Oscars, they said, "Are you kidding? Who would want to be this guy?" Right, as if this is not a glamorous portrayal at all, and that
Look, and I knew all the movie is actually quite accurate based on the things that Jordan testified about. I mean, there are obviously lots of things that have been embellished, but it's actually relatively accurate, including in terms of the debauchery. That stuff came out in the trials. But I did want to tell you about the one scene that I thought was fantastic. I will tell you, and Kelly, your point's well taken about Wall Street. I got news for you. The swindling and the profit incentive, that's true in many, many industries. I was a white-collar crime prosecutor for 19 years. I will tell you that construction and labor and insurance and the legal profession, and I mean these I can list off litanies of white-collar crime that's been conducted forever, and it's all about the profit motive. Wall Street, the money's just so crazy that people do hear about it a lot. But let me tell you about the scene. The scene with the Swiss banker in the movie is so fantastic because for those of you who haven't seen the movie, what Mr. Belfort did is he flew to open a bank account that was really his in Switzerland, but it was in the name of the English aunt who's the nominee holder of this stock. And in real life, he in fact opened such an account and had a conversation with the Swiss banker. What Scorsese did is he made the conversation happen inside their heads. And it was really fantastic because they have the conversation on the surface, if the FBI were listening and taping it, would have been perfectly legal. But what Belfort is saying to the guy, Jean-Jacques something, is, are you going to keep secret that I'm the actual owner of this money? And the Swiss banker in his head, again, they're both understanding each other, says, I understand you perfectly, and don't worry, you can count on me. And that is, frankly, the way that a lot of white-collar crime happens, which is why it's so difficult to detect.
But in that scene, it looks like it's an accident. I mean, it's so clever, right, to think that he gets the assurances without actually hearing it because he imagines, or the audience sees, the viewer sees, what the Swiss banker is literally saying. But you can imagine someone else in Jordan's position that's saying, no, I really need to hear you say it because I'm dropping millions of dollars in an account and I want to make sure.
Sure, it happens both ways, but I will tell you, having listened to a lot of wiretap tapes and seen a lot of Bloomberg instant messages over the years, people dance around it a whole lot more than they actually come out and say it.
And you're saying that there is an unspoken language that
there can be. Now look, listen, you have to prove a criminal case. You have to have evidence. You can't do it based on supposition. So I do think that had the FBI recorded that conversation, it would have been nowhere near enough to convict Mr. Belfort and the Swiss banker. That said, those little pieces of evidence add up, and I've seen it many, many times.
Kelly, given what you said earlier, can you imagine a film about Madoff one day?
It's brilliant material. It's probably a great story.
Right. I mean, it seems surreal to think about it, but we should brace yourself. There probably will be.
It's like the Hangover movie. You know, the movie comes out and everyone goes like, this is just horrifying. Well, some people think that. And what happens, most people, like guys who I know, they want to go on their bachelor trips, like, it's gonna be just like the Hangover. And that's what happens. It gives you these sort of cultural touch points that then play into all of it. And I'm not here, I mean, I understand the extent to which CNBC and the television news is all part of this broad phenomenon. I mean, we have a series called American Greed. You know, there's a dramatic voice telling you about these horrible crimes. And so what I'm trying to say is we are all part of the problem, and it's one that runs so deep because the idea of a story is so compelling and the kinds of behaviors are so fun to vicariously live through that it just feeds on itself. And I worry about the next Jordan Belfort. There's somebody somewhere in San Francisco, I don't know where, who right now is thinking this is going to be great material one day.
Jordan, did you actually feel that the film depicted you accurately, or did it create a hero that didn't deserve to be a hero? Do you see it the way Dan sees it, or do you see it the way that Kelly sees it?
I see it differently than both of them. I mean, listen, it's a movie. It's a guilty pleasure more than anything, and it's not meant to be a moral judgment. It's meant to basically make no moral judgment. This is exactly what Marty Scorsese said. He's not there to judge the characters. He's there to put a story on screen and let the people who watch it draw their own conclusions. She could be offended, someone else could clap down and say it's the greatest thing in the world. Now, I can tell you, I get hundreds of emails a day from people around the world who've either read the book or seen the movie. 98% of them are incredibly positive, empowering, great emails. They saw the movie, they got it. Wow, the motivation was great, the sales was great, but I know the mistakes you made. I never want to do that. I can learn from the bad as well as the good. 2% of them are morons. Say, I want to do quaaludes and have sex with hookers, okay? And those people are assholes, all right? Now, frankly, if you're sitting in this audience right now and you can't go to see The Wolf of Wall Street and realize that it's bad, there's something wrong with you. It's honest, you're fundamentally screwed up. It's obvious that it's not meant to. Is some stuff glamorous? Yes. Drugs is glamorous. Money's glamorous. Sex is glamorous. Does that mean it's what you want to do with your life? In other words, it's temptation. It's part of the human condition, and it's entertainment. So I think that, to make so much, like, people will go to the movie, and that's what's going to cause them to be good or bad. Well, here's the thing. When I looked at Wall Street, I idolized Gordon Gekko, and the biggest problem I had with it is he didn't take the fall. In the movie Wall Street 1, he ended up on top. And perhaps if he would have fallen in the movie, I would have felt differently. At the end, you never knew what happened. At least in The Wolf of Wall Street, I lose everything. My life is destroyed. I go to jail. So I think a smart person can go to see this movie and get what it's about. I think I give people more credit than that. I just do.
Kelly, the 98% of the people who write supportive letters to Jordan, does that horrify you, or do you actually think that?
No, I don't think your story is a movie, I mean, we're living this story right now. I don't think there are many people who look at poor Jordan Belfort and think, wow, this is a cautionary tale. He sold out the 92nd Street Y. He's going on a 45-city tour, and he's got a TV series that what?
But why is it? See, you're looking at things in very black and white, though. But because I did that because I've turned my life around over the last years. I was out committing crimes right now. People want to believe in redemption in this world. Maybe some don't. Most do. Most people want to believe in second chances. They want to believe in redemption. People go through life and make mistakes and want to come back from that. And when they look at my life now and say, this guy made all these mistakes and look how he's living his life today, it gives them hope. Okay? And if you want to live in a world where there's no hope, and if you make a mistake, you're done, it's game over, then that's a pretty sad world to live in. My belief.
You're right, but I think you're right, he's right. But let me just say, I agree, and the reason why people press you on your finances and everything is because there's not a real sense that this is a redemption story. There's a sense that this is a story of, wow, look at this thing I did, the time that I served, but I turned it around now, and now I'm telling you about it, and like,
people don't press me, journalists do. No, because they want to write bad news because bad news sells more than good news. Bottom line, okay? No one outside of journalists ever asks me, but journalists can ask me if they want, but it's because they want to sell newspapers and make hysteria where there is none. Okay, that's what it's about.
When I talk to people, about this event that it was coming up, and they sort of give me this look and they go, you know that guy's making bank. The money, there's this perception out there, perhaps, you need to do a better job of explaining how you have turned your, let me put it this way. If there was a Wall Street billionaire tomorrow that said, you know what, I don't want Jordan Belfort to get this publicity. I'm going to pay back the $200 million to everyone who was affected so that nobody ever has to pay another dime to hear his story.
People would want to hear even more about that. They'll make the story even more sensational. So people love this story. This story,
that's what I'm saying.
No, but they love it. You're missing the point. You relate it to it's not just the money. It's about the most of. It's about someone who lived a life, was almost dying every single day, had a massive drug addiction, had insane talent in certain aspects of business, misused it, manipulated people, destroyed his own life, and was able to come. It's a story that is, it's very extreme.
But you're selling successfully that story now.
Well, why would I? Should I sell it unsuccessfully?
What I'm saying is,
I don't understand.
I'm just saying.
We live in America, right?
Yes, but I think people would like to see you selling
What?
Bibles.
Really?
Or some.
Who wants to see me sell Bible? I don't know what you're talking about.
No, let me put it. Do you think?
I could be a great Bible salesman, by the way.
If you've changed your life and all that, is it legitimate? Let me put it this way. I'm 5 years old. I'm your kid. I look at your life and I say, here's what I've learned. I want to be real bad for 30 years so I can sell it real well for the next 30.
Really? Is that what you think my story? So let me just tell you one thing. If I would not have gotten in trouble, I'd probably worth $5 billion today. So here's the path to success. Go out, build a Wall Street firm, spiral out of control so you lose all your money, go to jail, so maybe in a 1 in a million chance you could write a book and get a movie made. That's such a long shot. You think that's a strat? You honestly think that's my strategy?
No.
I took lemons and made to lemonade.
I don't think that's your strategy
That's not
from
what you should
birth.
be. Anyone that's got half a brain will realize that's not the path to success. The path to success is to make wealth sustainably, do it the right way, keep your money, not go to jail. It's so obvious. I don't know
But then
what you're talking about.
you don't get Leonardo DiCaprio playing you in a movie if you do it that way.
You know what? Listen, we make mistakes, right? I made mistakes. Maybe you haven't made mistakes. Okay.
No.
I know Dan's made
Tons.
mistakes.
Tons.
Dan smoked a
Tons.
cigarette when we were. True story. Dan smoked a cigarette inside a federal building. It was against the law while we were going. So Dan makes mistakes.
Talk to my lawyers right there.
Okay. Okay. So listen.
That was really unscripted, Dan. I'm sorry about that.
I said I don't listen.
I told you no harm would come to you, and I lied.
People are, here's the thing, people are, it's a complex story, and people like this, for whatever reason, it connects with people on the best of and the worst of, okay? If you were really to actually listen to the things I say, if you go to YouTube and the things I teach when I actually go on stage, right? It's about doing things the right way. Ethics, integrity, not selling things to people just to make money because you feel needs. That's what my life represents today. Now, if you want to hang on to mistakes I made 25 years ago, that's your prerogative.
But but you do understand Kelly's point, right?
I don't actually.
No, at the end. But Kelly's not alone here. There are many people.
Well,
who
okay.
feel
So what's the
that
point?
In the end,
Yeah.
that you still profited from this behavior. That you are not living the life of a monk.
Why should I live?
Okay. I'm just
Do you live
simply
the life of a
saying.
monk?
I haven't committed these crimes.
So you're saying because I made
haven't
mistakes, I have to live a life of a monk? Is that
I'm
the
saying
society
there
we're in?
are people.
What are you talking about?
There are people who would wonder, once you've already committed these crimes, one should not profit from them into the future. And that is not an unreasonable view. It may not make sense to you. I can understand why.
Number one, I turned over, when I wrote this book, 50% of every dollar went back to investors. Then as soon as I started making any money, I turned over all the profits to investors from the books and the movie. And frankly, there's better ways to make money. Some of you probably are off this. It's the worst living in the world to write books and make money. It's hard. It takes a long time. I didn't write the book to profit from a crime. This was an accidental thing. If you think that I sat there and said, I'm going to write this bestseller because this is how I'm going to get rich again, there's a million ways to get rich in this world, and writing is not the path to the top. I'll tell you that much. Go ask any author.
Let's talk
I made the best as it was happening.
Let's talk about the Bible salesman.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. So gallant. Thank you.
Thanks.
In the film, one of the interesting, and I suspect this is true, there's a script, and you write the script, and with the script, you teach all of the Stratton Oakmark principals or brokers to do what you do. And it may be when you said to Kelly, yeah, I'd be a really good Bible salesman, my first thought is, he's going to write a Bible script, and that's what new Bible salesmen can use, and they'll sell a hell of a lot more Bibles that way. what's so successful about this script? And let's not talk about it from the perspective of selling Bibles, but tell me why was it so successful? And maybe does it address something about the nature of the investor internally? Is it that he or she is a born sucker?
No.
Is it that he or she is easily duped? Is it he or she is a dreamer? Is it that he or she sees other people making money in the stock market and thinks, you know, I hear people at work saying I make money in the stock market, and I'm just so weird I don't read the financial pages, and when finally someone, because the whole thing is so ridiculous in a way, you know, I don't know about everybody, but if I don't want anybody calling me cold. Forget stockbrokers. I don't want anyone calling me for anything, right? And so, yet, cold calls worked for you. That you were able to call up strangers, whether it was during dinner or not, and in 20 minutes, in the movie, it's disgusting how it's portrayed. You know, you see them reeling them in.
It wasn't like that, but that's good for theatrics.
It was really good, right? How you reeled them in, and everyone's laughing at how what suckers they are.
Right.
And it's disgusting, but it worked.
I cringed when I saw that because it was so, just so you know, because it makes me worse of a person. I'm not trying to defend myself. The fact that I pretended it was better than it was. You would never get up in front of a room of salespeople and say, guys, we're going to rip people off. No one wants to rip people off. So I would never say, with this script, we're going to reel them in, we can tell them the dog shit. You would never say that. Your brokers would all run out the door. So here's to make it a very quick answer here, because it could be a long one, is that it wasn't a script. It was a series of scripts that were part of a system called the straight line. And the straight line was something I invented in a moment of clarity when I was very young, and it was a new way of training salespeople. And what it did is I realized what I was doing automatically, and I was lining up certain core elements of influence that had to be lined up in someone else's mind, and I showed my people how to line up those elements in exactly what order, and those scripts represented a cohesive system. Along with that came with training in certain tonalities, how you say what you say, which reinforces the words that you say. That's what allowed these average young kids who were uneducated to go out there and influence very sophisticated people. Most of them were very sophisticated business people, and by following essentially this system, it worked. Now, are there natural human frailties that we played off of? Of course, and every salesperson does, sometimes to empower the customer, sometimes to rob from them when they're being unethical. For instance, you say, why would people send their money to Bernie Madoff? Well, he played on the whole thing of joining the club. You have to be special to be in Bernie Madoff's club.
But you know, I was going to ask you, it's very interesting that you bring up Bernie Madoff, because what we also know about him, and I don't know if we know this about you, is that he took pity on some people and they didn't take their money. And so he played a sort of exclusive club, and there were some people that, for whatever reason, I mean, I'm wondering, was there ever a time on the phone you said, somebody says to you, this is the only $50,000 I have. Did you reel them in? I know you didn't do it in the movie, it's depicted. Were there times that you said to yourself, you know what, I just can't take this person?
The system I created was based on calling the richest 1% of Americans. We bought a list of Dun & Bradstreet business owners doing in excess of $10 million a year. That was the list that we called from. So the whole idea was that you were opening up wealthy people. That was our rationalization, by the way, which it's not as bad as calling poor people. Obviously, it's still wrong.
But in the movie, your first wife, it's a very small moment.
That's fictionalized.
That never happened. In the first movie, the first wife says to you,
fictionalized.
I'm really troubled by who you're selling money because the stocks are terrible.
No, it was a conversation that I had with myself in bed every night when I was working when I started my new firm. I hated the system of calling average moms and pops and selling them penny stocks. I came up with the idea on my own of selling $5 stocks to wealthy business owners. So that's fictionalized with my wife.
So your first wife, nobody was saying to you, Jordan, you just can't do this anymore.
No, never. She had no idea about my business at all. But I was saying it to myself. I hated what I was doing. Not a day, and I probably said this to you, Dan, when I was cooperating, is not a day went by when there wasn't a voice in the back of my head saying, what the hell am I doing? How did it go so far off course? My parents are in the audience, okay? My mom is one of the most ethical women I've ever met in my life. She went back to law school in her early 60s. She passed the bar. She's been voted Lawyer of the Year in Long Island. She does all pro bono work, okay? My father, who you saw portrayed in the movie, is all. I mean, my dad overpaid in his taxes. You know, never got a speeding. I came from an ethical family. My brother's the top attorney in healthcare, so I wasn't sent out into the world to scam. I went off course. It was one tiny step at a time. And before I knew it, I was doing things I thought I'd never do, and I became desensitized. And that's what happens to people. They don't just go, I mean, at least people that really come from the right, some people, maybe they go out to scam, right? I did not. I started off trying to do the right thing, and then it got to a certain point where it got so off course, and I was so addicted to drugs that I was driving around my car in Long Island, and my wife, my then wife, we'd say, all these people are taking Quaaludes in these homes, right? Because there's no way you could live sober. We convinced ourselves that the whole world was living as we were living, okay? And, you know, frankly, you know, again, when I look back at my behavior today and what happened back then, the only way to avoid that from happening in anyone's life is not to take the first step. It's the first step. Once you are half pregnant with ethics, you can't be half pregnant. It's the bottom line.
I just want to say, to be fair, you know, that was the target plan, according to the evidence, to hit the top 1%. By the end, they were so drug-fueled and desperate for victims and more money for their scam that they were not limiting themselves to just rich people.
And I was gone for 4 years. I wasn't there. So that's fiction. In the movie, it's fictionalized. I left the firm in '94.
So you're saying more poor people were
I was gone in
More
93.
unsophisticated people were targeted after you left.
I left the firm. I sold the firm. In the movie, it's fictionalized. I'm staying.
But again, to be fair, part of the money laundering was you continued to get profits from the firm.
For a year.
You got how much did you get?
$12 million.
$1 million a month, which
Right.
is money laundering counts in his charge and in some of the other charges.
Dan, let's talk a little about the cooperating witness testimony.
I love Dan, by the way. He's the best.
That's why we brought Dan Alonso. Dan, let's talk about the cooperating witness relationship that you built here with Jordan. My understanding, and there are lawyers in the room that will obviously know this was an unusual cooperating witness because normally the cooperators are henchmen and they're being used to get the biggest fish that you can get. In this instance, we started with the biggest fish you can get, and we were actually dropping down to pick up as many more of the fish, smaller fish. I mean, economically, is that the appropriate way to look at this? That we should look, the idea that the U.S. Attorney's Office takes the position, look, we just want to get as many people as possible, even though he's the mastermind, even though it's his script, even though these guys would be, God knows what they'd be, parking attendants. He got them into this thing. They were a bunch of clowns. He turned them into rich drug addicts, and now we're going to put them in jail because he caves earlier. Is that justice?
So, just to clarify a few points. The rich drug the brokers, we made a decision at a certain point that we didn't prosecute.
Exactly, you didn't, yeah.
Right. So what you need to understand, the backdrop of all this is that Mr. Belfort's crime was not in the sales pitches, right? The sales script by itself could be a crime under the law, but it wouldn't have been that interesting to us at the time. What was very interesting is that he was, in addition, manipulating the stock market. So what he was doing was all these stocks that the brokers were touting on the investing public, he was secretly owning. He had what he called rat holes. It's sort of glossed over in the movie, but these are nominees, friends, family, people who pretend that they're the owner of the stock when really he's the owner of the stock. And by controlling surreptitiously all the supply of the stock and whipping up the demand with the brokers doing all the selling and giving them a commission, he's shooting the price up.
So the movie has that wrong because it gives you the impression, right?
Yeah, that was
The movie, look, brokers were selling, but it gives the impression that that's the crime. The crime that we prosecuted, at least, was the market manipulation.
Well, remember this.
But then why are there 1,500 victims? I mean, because
they had to get the money from
because
somewhere.
it's their
the
money.
victims. Yeah,
right.
it
It's
the
their
victims'
money. Right.
But the defendants that we prosecuted, it was, they weren't the central to the scheme, but they were more co-conspirators. So basically, just to correct you, I was not the person who investigated the case. I did not file the indictment against Mr. Belfort and Mr. Porish. That was Joel Cohen, who was referred to earlier. I inherited the case after Mr. Belfort had been cooperating for a little less than a year.
You were the attorney once he became a cooperator.
That's right. And I primarily handled the trial of Stratton Oakmont's outside auditor. You know, one of the questions that's asked, Kelly, in financial crises and the accounting fraud scandals of the early 2000s, where were the professionals? Where were the auditors? Where were the lawyers? So we prosecuted Stratton Oakmont's outside lawyer, who was a co-conspirator in this crime. And we prosecuted him based on Mr. Belfort's testimony, Mr. Porsche's testimony. These were very labor-intensive cases. There were not that many people prosecuted based on their testimony, but they were people who were conspirators. They conspired to manipulate the market.
But the jury in the end still had to believe Jordan, right? That was important. And
that's right.
One question I want to know is, I know in the book, I think I read somewhere, it's not in the book, you read that you actually believed, maybe still do, that this man is one of the great salesmen that you'd ever met. In fact, I think at one point you might have invited him to the Manhattan DA's office to actually talk to to say, this is what an incredible con man sounds like.
No, that's not right. This is what a cooperating witness is like.
Okay,
and this is what you folks need to have in your mind when you talk to
but you know how the Swiss banker had communications?
Yeah.
I think they were doing that too. This is what, my guess is those guys said, what an amazing con man sounds like. Now the question is, isn't there a risk that when you have a guy with this talent that is playing the role of cooperating witness, that he's not going to be believed because part of the case is to demonstrate that this guy is not to be believed?
Yes.
I mean, it seems odd that he's the one guy that you really don't want as a cooperating witness, the one guy that everyone believes would lie.
That doesn't follow, right? So the government regularly, and by the way, I've been gone from the Department of Justice for 8 years, and I'm not speaking for them, but the government regularly has cooperating witnesses who have done horrible, vicious things every single day, from Goodfellas to gang leaders. And the question is not, are they bad people, right? If the question was, are they bad people, don't use them. Well,
the question is, are they telling the truth here?
The question is, are they telling the truth here? And judges instruct juries, and the law, has centuries behind it of just because somebody is a bad person or has done bad things doesn't mean that you can't believe him. But you have to scrutinize it extra carefully. And there are legions of cases where juries don't believe him, and legions of cases where they do. In the case of the people we prosecuted based on Mr. Belfort and Mr. Porsche, there was lots and lots of corroboration that these people had in fact committed the crimes that they were alleged to have committed. So yeah, we had to rely on the testimony of cooperators, but no prosecutor worth his or her salt would just rely on the word of a cooperator, certainly not one with as much baggage, no offense.
Untaken.
Jordan, you had to wear a wire.
Yes.
It's in the movie, and we know that you did. In the movie, at some point, you tell the Duchess, your second wife, God, I may get a deal, but I have to wear wire. She says something to you like, well, I thought you said I have to wear wire against my friends. And she says something like, well, you said there's no such thing as friends on Wall Street or something. I forgot what she says exactly, but the tenor is, there's no loyalty here, and you need to do what you have to do. What was the strategy? Apparently, everyone reports that you came forward very early and said, I'm willing to cooperate, and I'm willing to wear a wire. In the movie, actually, it shows that you fight back at some point, and you say, I'm not doing it, and there's that very dramatic scene. That dramatic scene apparently didn't happen in real life.
It did.
It did?
Yeah. Where he slipped the note? Yeah, that happened.
Well, the slipping of the note did, but the idea that that happened, because is that part of the obstruction of justice?
Yes.
He got prosecuted separately. I prosecuted him separately.
Well,
I want to talk about. The reason I want to ask this because it's an interesting point. In the movie, you show Donnie a note. You write a note, and it says
that's fictionalized. You have to understand they collapsed characters and integrated storylines for the sake of the narrative, right? Here's what really happened.
But I want to hear that. But I also want to hear when a person wears a wire, right? How do we know that they're not playing favorites? That you're intentionally not getting as much information because you like the guy? Right, well, and how do prosecutors protect against something like that?
Listen, wearing a wire was probably the most difficult thing I ever had to do, by far with this case. And the reason I didn't plead, here's what happened. I was indicted, and I was going to fight the case until Joel Cohn said, if you don't cooperate, we're going to indict your wife. That was when I agreed to cooperate immediately. And I think most men in this audience probably would do the same if they had 2 kids.
By the way, was there anything on the Duchess, Dan?
She was never prosecuted. I'm not going to.
But I'm just wondering, was that a bluff?
I'm just not going to get into that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was a bluff, but she was a mother of my children. I couldn't even take that chance, all right?
Also, by the way, I was not on the
You
case.
might not
You
know.
weren't there yet,
You might
right.
not even
No,
know.
but I'm
So-
familiar with the evidence. I'm not going to get into it.
So I had no choice, okay? They were using my wife as leverage over me. And then originally, I really didn't think I'd have to wear a wire because most of it was historical information. And also, my lawyer said to me, listen, everyone in this game, everyone flips. No one's going to go to trial. Everyone's going to co-op. Everyone's going to sort of, it's like,
Yeah.
he had this saying, the Italians sing on Mulberry Street, the Jews sing on Court Street. That's what he used to say, my lawyer, right? So that, all the Jews, talk, right? So you're not going to have to rat out your friends. They're all going to plead guilty and cooperate themselves. That played out for the most part. Most people did cooperate. When I was forced to wear a wire, the first time it was against a close friend of mine. And wasn't the Donnie Azoff character, it was a different guy. And he was it was a related case. It didn't really matter what it was about. It was political overtones involved, very complicated. And they wanted me to wear a wire. And I had every intention. I went to this meeting with this guy, and I was going to get him to say whatever I wanted to say. Then I looked him in the eyes. He was a good friend. I just couldn't do it. And at that moment in time, I made a moral decision, that I'm not going to rat my friend out. And I slipped him a note. I wrote a little note saying, don't incriminate yourself. And I walked away from that meeting. And you have to understand, this is my life is a shambles at this point. I'm under indictment. My wife leaves me the first day I get arrested. I guess she didn't read the Gold Digger's Handbook. You're supposed to wait 6 months, I figured, but she left the first day, right? But anyway, so my life's a wreck, and I'm sitting wired up, and I made this decision. And in that moment, and to this day, I can still live with the decision. I can still live with the extra 6 months I spent in jail because of it, that I didn't rat my friend out. Well, lo and behold, 8 months later, he got in trouble, and he ratted me out and saying I slipped a note. And I then had to get something. I never really found out the full story because it was sealed what happened, but he ratted me out, and I had to plead guilty for slipping him the note. And and it was terrible. And after that, I was like, you know what? There are no friends. And then I wore a wire after that again, and I felt a lot better about it. Let's just say.
Leniency in exchange for cooperation. Dan, you do understand why this bothers people, right? I mean, it's
As a general matter?
It's a general matter. I mean, as a specific matter, yes. But as a general matter, can you explain why it's so justified? It seems like purely based on administrative efficiency, but it doesn't seem like it achieves justice. It seems that people should be punished according to what they've done. And then you end up seeing these very disparate punishments, right? I mean, was it 2 days ago? Martoma's 9 years, Steinberg is 3.5. It looks like they did roughly the same thing. The thing that it was funny when I don't know if it's true of Indians. I know that they said about Italians and Jews sing. But I read the other day that, is it Rajaratnam's case? Rajaratnam's case. He refused to testify against Gupta. These were three guys that went to Wharton, got their MBAs together, three Indians, one of whom is the one, what's his name, what's his name? He's the first one who flipped, Kumar. Kumar flipped, and then, but Rajaratnam, so I'm saying it's not, there's a story in that, right? He's saying, I'm simply not going to rat out my friends.
That's the story you hear about. Maybe there's something more going on beneath the surface,
okay.
right? Like
just saying that
someone's holding money for someone.
Jordan, I have no doubt most people sing on Court Street. I mean,
Right.
and Mott Street. I have no doubt. But I do know that it does lead to what appears to be unjust, inequitable results or outcomes. In the end of this book, there's this incredible piece where your whole family, your parents and you, are just stunned at that you wound up getting punished as much as Danny did. Mm-hmm. And you thought, my God, I did so much more to contribute to this case. Shouldn't I have gotten less? And then at one point you say, yeah, but I got to admit I was the mastermind. You come to your own self-realization, that I recognize I was the mastermind. But to you, it seemed like, well, look, I really cooperated. I provided a lot of value for the prosecutor, and shouldn't I have been rewarded with more? And in one hand, you can see why Jordan says it, and you can imagine why his victims or other people look and say, you've got to be kidding. 2 years is all you get for a $200 million fraud?
Well, look, it's like anything else when you've got government decision-making. It's all about the good judgment or bad judgment of the people making it. So I don't think any prosecutor or U.S. attorney around today would tell you that they want to cooperate every single person that comes through the door, and you have to weigh the pros and cons. So, you know, in a normal case, you know, the way, let me back up. So we say that there might be these injustices and people say, oh my God, this sounds really like somebody, you know, got less than they should have gotten. But then we want the government to uncover political corruption rings, and we want the government to clean up entire drug gangs in housing projects, and we want the government to uncover insider trading on Wall Street and accounting fraud at Enron and all those other crimes that the government does. And I assure you that those prosecutions would have been and would be, continue to be a lot less significant if we did away with this concept of cooperation. And I think that it would be a very bad thing for crime control generally to do away with cooperation.
But do prosecutors sometimes sit back and say, yes, if you have the long view, this is the right thing to do, but the public simply can't accept this?
Well, listen, prosecutors are supposed to do what they believe is right, what is in the best interest of justice, and they're supposed to do it without fear or favor. And that's how I'm sure, as I said, I didn't make the decision to offer Mr. Belfort a cooperation agreement. I'm not here to comment on that decision one way or another. You know, people make those decisions for all sorts of reasons. Some people would make it, some people wouldn't make it. But the reality is that, you know, the way it works, which is sort of an interesting thing which most people don't know, he got caught essentially for the scam with the British relative.
Which is in the end what really was.
Right. Which is what ultimately brought him down. The government knew at the time, but couldn't really prove that he had manipulated stock in a lot of other securities. And so what happens is you sort of get caught for one thing and you're facing, say, 15 years, which is probably what he was looking at for the fraud that he got caught on. Then the government debriefs the cooperator for weeks or months. And then once we know everything that they now say they've done, there's now a superseding charge, and they have to plead guilty to everything, whether or not the government knew about it and whether or not we could prove it. So what Mr. Belfort went into sentencing facing not 15 years, but between 27 and 33 years, as I recall, and the judge gave him 48 months, which is 4 years, and then the rest was.
But you can understand his position. It's like, well,
sure.
I'm only facing the maximum because I gave you the maximum.
That's
you
right.
never had the maximum.
That's exactly right.
I gave it to you because you cut a deal for me, and so therefore the time that I should be serving shouldn't be based on the maximum. It should be based on what I was facing.
But the law is that it's based on the maximum, and imagine if you had gotten 20 years. You might be saying, boy, that's an injustice for him. He should have never cooperated.
There's a whole other aspect to this. That's the sentencing guidelines, which, unless it's changed when I was there, the judges hated it, the U.S. attorneys hated it. The sentencing guidelines took away all discretion from both prosecutors and judges. So they were in this really terrible spot of not wanting to destroy someone's life. Like, you know, you say the public is angry, whether it's 9 years for Martoma or this. Well, before I came here tonight, I was interviewed by a Dutch journalist, and he looked at me as if we were the most barbaric societies. This guy got 9 years in Holland. You have to murder someone to get 9 years. How could you put away a financial criminal for not, like, they thought it was insane in other countries.
Yeah, but they invented the tulip scam.
That's right. My point
Just
is,
saying, they deserve to be punished.
My point is this, is that when you talk about like what the public feels, it's like, it's a big generalization. Some people believe in leniency. Others people believe everyone should get the death penalty. And at the end of the day, the only way he can put it up to the discretion of a judge is through a 5K letter. There's no other way.
No, and to put it really succinctly, prosecutors deal in evidence. So without evidence, we can't prove cases. So, you know, that is part of the evidence that they use is search warrants, wiretaps, email, but some of it is cooperating witnesses, and there's no better way to find out what happened inside a conspiracy than a cooperator.
Kelly, we're spending the last hour talking about the dark side of Wall Street. This is your beat. You cover it. You've covered it at the Wall Street Journal. Now you have your own program on CNBC. You obviously enjoy the financial markets. You know about it. You could have been a sports person. You could have been a foreign policy analyst. You could be covering tonight's Obama speech instead. Are you of the view that the dignity of Wall Street doesn't get enough attention, that is somewhat underreported as a story? for instance, the charitable giving, the innovation of it. You know, are you of view that when we see movies, we see this? When we hear stories, these are and you and Jordan had battled it out about the sort of the seedy or compelling side, which drives people. You know, it's driving the Ferrari. The story that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett have agreed to divest themselves of all of their billions by the time they die is not as interesting a movie, I guess, that they're willing to give away all of their money. I don't even know whether anyone went to see the movie about Stephen Jobs with Ashton Kutcher. You know, you would have thought, wow, that's interesting, invented the iPhone. I'm not sure if people find that story as interesting as you said. My God, I'm sure somebody's going to do the Madoff story. That the Titans...
Well, but I'm not sure the Madoff story is graphic enough. I mean, it's so... It may or may not be. It depends on the details of it. But I guess what I'm just saying is that I don't think humanity changes that much. Like, I think the same sort of spectacles that attracted us 3,000 years ago still attract us today. And that it's just sort of reinvention in a different form. So just going back to your question about Wall Street, frankly, I don't know enough. I wouldn't claim, even given how many people I've met and come across, to really have any sense or to be able to generalize that much. I mean, I will tell you, if there's one pervasive sentiment on Wall Street today, it's a bunch of guys who are looking at a career that's not as bright as it was when they got into it, or that they hoped it would be by this point, and they're feeling a little depressed and ready to, look elsewhere. They all wish they were programmers or something. But it's still a lucrative business, and I think, if there are things that I appreciate about the movie or about the discussion that we're having, or about elements of what Jordan did, I mean, in a certain way, it takes the excess to draw your attention to the average or the normal. And so I think sometimes it's helpful to have these extreme or egregious episodes to cite to say, well, wait a minute, if somebody goes 50%, but they could have gone to 100%, then we have a problem here that we might not have otherwise been aware of. So because of how flagrant some of the stuff was that happened in the 90s, we have the regime that exists today. For better or for worse. So, as I said, it sort of takes that extreme example often to draw attention to a problem that's maybe been festering. It's true for insider trading. It was true back then. And I just don't know where we stand today. I mean, what interests me about covering the financial markets, which is sort of how I think about it, I don't really think about the people involved so much as I think about the aggregate kind of, where's the 10-year bond yield trading and where is the Dow Jones Industrial Average trading today? And it's actually something that Michael Lewis, I think, wrote years and years and years ago, which is, if you want to know where society is heading, if you want to get some sense of the truth that underlies the principles by which people live, that's the place to look. I think he called it the tracer die once. It's kind of like, there's something about the behavior of the wealthy that can tell you a lot about what we value as a society and what's happening out there, generally speaking. And I think that's what I find interesting, sometimes encouraging, sometimes horrifying. And I don't necessarily think just because somebody makes $30 billion and gives it all away, that it's hard to comment almost beyond that without getting into morally, ethically, how we feel about the fact that in the financial markets, you can make billions and billions of dollars seemingly out of nothing. And there are some who argue that what Jordan did in a way was more honest than the people who would just kind of sell you a collateralized debt obligation or some sort of instrument that's sophisticated, isn't all that it's chalked up to be, and by the way, if a financial crisis hits, you'll be left holding the bag, and so will all the pensioners who depended on what you represent. So I do not truly mean to purely demonize and moralize. It's just that it's complicated, and I don't know what more to say.
Do you, as a financial journalist, feel ambivalent about stories that make the industry look bad?
I don't think about it that way. I mean, to me, I don't feel like I'm part. I feel like I'm watching all. Like I just feel like an observer. I find it interesting to watch how all of this unfolds and just think about it that way. Maybe because I don't live on Wall Street. I'm not in this. If I worked in finance first and had a bunch of, and then it'd be different. But you don't
feel like your network doesn't feel like it needs to protect the industry. On the one hand, these are great stories. On the other hand, it just makes everyone look, it reinforces stereotypes about people who work on Wall Street.
Right. I think that's something that whether you're covering it or in it, there's certainly that tension between, for every bad apple, there's a good apple. And I do think that there's the struggle. It's not about protecting it so much as, is this a representation of the truth or not?
Movies, Wall Street never does well in movies. It may have something to do with the fact that money itself, and I was thinking as we were talking about gangster movies, somehow maybe Kelly's right. We don't have those, most people don't have connections to people that got whacked, but everyone has some connection to money. And there's maybe some thought that money leads evil, that there's a sense of relationship between money and evil.
Money is the root of all evil.
Right, the root of all evil, and so that movies, the perfect storm is evil that's somehow associated with money. I mean, I was thinking that, there's other movies like Arbitrage came out fairly recently. That's a negative portrayal. I'll tell you what I think is an underrated negative portrayal, Mary Poppins. Mr. Banks, the guys at the bank, it's awful. It really is. I knew that as a kid. I just knew that Mr. Banks wasn't getting a clear shake. And
but remember, it was Lloyd Blankfein who said rather seriously recently in the last year or two that, Goldman's that he felt like he was doing God's work.
But was the Rolling Stone article said that he was a squid on the face of corporate America?
Was a vampire squid.
Right, so those are right. That's a very different image.
Right, but I think, as you say, the general assumption out there still, and we see this in a lot of what's happening now, even the big banks, there continues to be a lot of regulatory action against them, and various political parties use them as a punching bag because it goes back to this sense that they aren't for good.
Right.
I have to say, this whole discussion, I'm no apologist for Wall Street, but I did used to represent folks on Wall Street when I was in private practice. It seems a bit one-sided. I mean, nobody's done a movie about the Wall Street banker who underwrites a bond issue so a school can be built.
Exactly.
Or a hospital can be built.
That's why I was asked.
They don't go to work every day, going like this.
That's a wonderful life.
Or it's a wonderful George Bailey,
Right.
That's what I meant by dignity to the profession that oftentimes gets overlooked. Yeah. Speaking of dignity, in the late 1980s when we saw the very first wave of insider trading cases, we got very used to seeing rich guys with nice Armani suits getting hauled off with handcuffs and having the SEC and FBI dragging behind with incriminating documents. Boesky, Milken, Dennis Levine. I had on this stage once Oliver Stone, and we talked about this. And I said, he had said that he had just gone down to see the Occupy Wall Street movement. And I said, it's interesting. I think that they blame you a little for what's happened. And he says, why? And I said, well, you through Wall Street, you gave people the impression that when bad chicanery takes place, guys get taken away. And they're not seeing this in 2008. They're not seeing as many people get taken away. And so that's one way of looking. Another way of looking at it, a guy like Michael Milken turned his life around and became, a fairly significant philanthropist. And I guess the one question I might ask you, Jordan, is there a future in philanthropy for you? Not philandering, but philanthropy. Can you imagine? Milken's story is a comeback story. He battled cancer, and he's really devoted his life. He's barred from trading for life from Wall Street, and yet he's found another.
Well, listen, Not that I know of, okay?
We do know, Jordan, that your tennis game has improved enormously.
Listen, I can say this. Number one, this whole idea that money is the root of all evil is utterly ridiculous. Money is like alcohol. It makes you more of what you already are. If you're an asshole, it makes you a bigger asshole. If you're a great person, it makes you one. It's not going to change people, okay? But in terms of I love making money. I'm happy to pay back my fine, to live a good life, and yes, and I do give to charity, and I will continue to give to charity, but my whole life's not about money anymore. I love doing what I do. I travel the world, and I empower people, and I love speaking publicly, and I can look back at my life in perspective and say that, what happened, and the reason why, you talk about that people won't make movies about interesting Wall Street, it's not bad, but look at Social Network. Social Network was a good movie, a really interesting movie about, because they focused on the people. The reason that the Steve Jobs movie is because it sucked. It was a bad movie. That's why no one saw it. Just sucked, right? They made a great movie about Steve Jobs' life. See, no one cares about Wall Street. Wall Street's the backdrop to the Wolf of Wall Street. It's about the people in the movie. It's always about the human beings. When I wrote my book, Tommy Chong, believe it or not, was my bunkmate in jail. Can you imagine? Of all the people they put me in jail with, Tommy Chong is my bunkmate, the biggest pothead.
Chong.
Yeah, he's my bunkmate. And he said to me, he goes, no one wants to hear about Wall Street. They want to know about the people who move through Wall Street, and they want to know about the most of. People want to know about the extreme, because you said it's because the extreme, because they're all living the average, and the extreme is what connects with people. So the only thing that my one complaint with the movie, I have a few, but the one big one is that it on some level, with young kids entering the workplace, they don't portray correctly how I got sucked in. When I went to that penny stock firm and I'm like, hey, is this legal? They're like, not really. If they would have said that, I would have ran out the door. They said, oh, of course it's legal. We got a license on the wall. We remember. So I was 23 years old. I had no idea. So what I say to people is that, you have to use your own gut. If something doesn't seem right, question the status quo. Just don't look at the license on the wall and say it must be right because it's approved by the government because they're licensed. So, I think that, and in terms of Wall Street overall, I think that there's a lot of great people on Wall Street that do great things, and they do get noticed. They do. They're in the paper all the time.
Let's take some questions from the audience and some from audiences from remote locations. For instance, this one comes from Sedona, Arizona, the theater in Sedona, Arizona, and the question is obviously to Jordan. What is the single most important thing the individual investor can do to protect themselves from the unscrupulous operator?
Very simple. Back when I was doing what I did, there was no internet. Right now, all the information that you need to make an informed decision exists online, and plus a couple of phone calls that you can find, either institutions that will protect you online. I would say never accept information from someone that you don't impeccably trust at face value without doing your own research and without at least checking with one or two very seasoned professionals that you would definitely trust with your own money. So it's the idea not to impulse buy. Don't just go on someone's word. Do your own due diligence.
Kelly, this is for you. I think you've sort of answered it a little, and I think you might want to stay away from it too. Do you see similarities between Mr. Belfort and Lloyd Blankfein, the bankers who created the latest financial crisis? The reason, it's obviously not a direct connection. The connection they're making is there are damages to people. And should we see all damages to people, even if they're not actually committing crimes, should we still see them in the same way?
I almost feel like you should answer. I don't know. Like I said, the comparison that I would make to some extent is that the financial crisis was one of systemic proportions, but it was one where people kind of believed what they were told without really questioning it. Whether they could have listened to that little voice deep down telling them maybe the housing market would collapse or not is probably a different kind of question than whether or not you should trust the guy who's trying to sell you a stock when your bigger hesitation is, well, will my wife get upset with me? I really don't know if there are that many parallels you can draw between the two.
They're pretty different. This man ran a bucket shop. It looked like he said it had a big sign on the wall and a fancy name and a fancy commercial, but it was a scam as old as the 1920s. So comparing that to folks who allowed greed to overcome, their reliance on one particular sector of the market is very, very different.
This question comes to us from London, as in London, England, and I don't think she knows your former aunt, who I'm sorry is deceased, I know from the movie. What does the panel think of high-frequency trading? Maybe we should start with you, Kelly.
I would just say that, in a sense, think about high-frequency trading as the machines that replace the people who, for example, used to be the intermediary of the New York Stock Exchange, matching buyers with sellers. There are people who will say they are the biggest problem on Wall Street and people who say they have little or no impact at all. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the middle. We ask Jack Bogle at Vanguard, guys who have been around for decades, about this all the time. Charles Schwab has said they really do hurt individual investors. Jack Bogle maybe sounds a little bit less concerned. I haven't heard any major red flags beyond what the industry is already trying to do to make sure these aren't computers that are just generating orders for the sake of capturing activity between those orders and then penalizing the individual investor.
I would say the jury's out. I'm a big observer of the regulators and prosecutors out there. Let's wait and see what they do.
Jordan, this is from Inside the Why. If you believe that what you're doing is in the best interest of your client, to what extent does the means justify the ends? Where do you think manipulation crosses the line? Knowing what you know, when you know, how you know.
Manipulation in terms of sales pressure?
Yeah.
Like that's what manipulation?
Yeah, I think
it's a very good question because, you know, I always say that at the heart of ethics in sales is only selling things to people who actually need them and can benefit from them. You know, sometimes people are in denial of their own pain, which is something as salespeople we use then to essentially amplify that pain so they can realize they need to make a decision now and they'll feel better, right? So in that sense, it's ethical if someone's in complete denial. Let's say you're in an insurance business and you're trying to sell someone a life insurance policy and the family really needs it. I mean, they need coverage. It's going to, protect the family and serve them for the short and long term.
They're a true customer.
Yeah, but yet the person, the person who's going to, the man or the woman who needs to cover it is in denial, very tough to sell. They just have limiting beliefs about buying and making decisions. In that case, it would be ethical to put a little pressure on that person because they really need it. It's going to serve them for the long term. So in that case, yes, some pressure should be applied, but not to the point where you make someone uncomfortable to make a decision that goes against everything they stand for. But if it's going to serve them and their family, I think a good salesman owes it to the client to at least amplify their pain so they can not be in denial and make a decision with their eyes open versus blinders on. A lot of times people make decisions that go against their own self-interest because they don't have all the facts or they're in denial. So you wake up to denial, give them all the facts, and then ask them for the order again in the right way, and then you can close them.
Here's a question I didn't ask earlier that I wanted to. Are you of the view that actually most people on Wall Street, stockbrokers who are selling whatever the security or whatever they're selling, that they're in some ways doing something that's either illegal or unethical, cutting a corner? Nobody's actually selling anything on Wall Street, honestly.
I disagree. I think most brokers do it right. And I think that if you have 10 or 15% that are doing it wrong, the problem is in this industry, there's so much leverage and there's so much amplification that goes on because of that a little bit of fraud just destroys the whole system. AIG, case in point. You have this massive company, 98.9% of the company is doing things exactly right. 8 guys up in Connecticut destroy the whole company, right? Because like this little tiny sliver is being done wrong. So if you looked at AIG and what percentage was wrong versus right, it's like 98% plus, right? I think that's mostly the case. Now let me say this, back in 2007, I probably would give you a different answer. Because at the height of the GFC, there was this wholesale collapse, as you said, but it was like a step, people just like were in denial over like houses will always go up, who cares that these CDOs are really dog crap. And you saw the emails from the analysts, hey, we better stamp this pig right now and run before the whole thing collapses and get our bonuses. I mean, but these weren't bad, evil people. People that lost their way, and it almost became the insane became the norm, right? So that was 2007. I think things have changed today. There's still fraud out there, but I think people have learned, and the idea is hopefully not to repeat the past again.
And let me just add, by the way, the brokerage model has decreased in size substantially, and today it's truly all about just people wanting to suck up assets generally, charge you a fee on what they're managing as opposed to selling you an individual stock.
Exactly.
And study after study also underscores the extent to which the Americans don't own stocks like anymore. They might have it in a 401k, they might own a couple of ETFs. There's these new things called motifs that are a big hit, but they're partly because of this, people have just kind of left that model behind altogether.
So the incentives have changed and how they actually sell these products. One last question, let's take this one. This is for Jordan. Can you isolate the single moment that was the tipping point when things turned in the direction where it all ended? Now, earlier you made it sound like, the day I started, but that can't be right.
No.
I mean, something must have happened.
There was one point in time, about a year and a half, 2 years in, where someone gave me a big bag of cash, like $300,000 in cash. And because I would have done the trade on the way it was supposed to be, it would have created a red flag with the NASDAQ. So we did the trade at a higher price. They owed me money. They kicked me back cash. And the guy said to me, it was you know who it was, Al, right? And okay.
He's still talking.
Okay, and in that moment, I knew it was wrong, and I said I shouldn't do this, but I said, you know what? He said to me, oh, everyone does this on Wall Street, and I should have known better. And I was like, you know what? I'll take it, and I'll do things right, and then I'll be a pillar. Now they'll have this money, and that one major step was how it started, because my line of ethics and integrity moved a bit. And then I'm doing things right again. But next time, it moves a bit further still, and then a bit further still. And slowly, through these tiny, almost imperceptible steps, you find yourself doing things you thought you'd never do, associating with people you never thought you'd associate, and it all seems perfectly okay. It's like dipping your toe in a piping hot bathtub. It's hot, and then all of a sudden, 5 minutes later, you're submerged under the water, and it feels perfect. That's how the human beings, we get desensitized to things. And that's it. It's no excuse. It's not an excuse, but it's just the way it happens. And I think the only way, I said it earlier, to avoid that is not take the first step.
Please join us for the Forum Film Festival, which will be held throughout October and November. 3 nights will be here at the 92nd Street Y. I think your programs already have information about it. We have Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer will be here to discuss the film The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
Oh, I love it.
We have best-selling legal thriller writer Michael Connelly to discuss the film based on his book, The Lincoln Lawyer. Settle down. We'll say goodbye in a second. And then, one second, then we have really a very exciting night. You may remember the human rights activist who was disinvited from giving the commencement address at Brandeis University, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She will be here along with Global Affairs Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for your old paper, the Wall Street Journal, Bret Stephens, discussing the film Submission, which was the reason why Vincent van Gogh's grandnephew, Theo van Gogh, was murdered on the streets of Amsterdam 10 years ago. Hope to see you for that, for the Forum Film Festival. But first, let's say goodnight to our guest, Jordan Belfort.
Thank you.
Kelly Evans, Dan Alonso. Thank you all.
Thank you.